because he was chief minister when he was deputy prime minister and prime minister for a short while, 6 7 months. But the country, if we had taken the route of free enterprise, there was no reason why we have not had it much better. Or say if Patel had been the prime minister, you won't have the Kashmir problem. There is a post there called KKC Chowki, the guard place full of that water. He tried his best. He advised Patel, but Nehru would not budge. They wanted to give us 24 hours. Nehru did not agree to that.
Part of the administration. Thank you, sir. Thank you. The president has been Balochistan. They upon the Balochistan. Okay, this right, that is not enough. You have to pursue some action. That's why secretary comes.
No, people read and they may be impressed, but that's it in most cases.
That's why you have to pursue some action.
Persistent. How much?
Very well done. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. फिर मैं क्या मैं स्टार्ट कर लूँ प्रोफेसर कह रही है ना स्टार्ट कर
So I'm not saying that. Saying what's a good thing?
Same point, you know,
Friday.
Live streaming.
ये लोग तो वहाँ खड़े हैं वो है ना पोडियम
हाँ
पोडियम में नजर आ रहा है
मेरा ये ट्राइपॉड है ना ये ट्राइपॉड ठीक नहीं है इतना ही आता है
लोग वॉल लोग नजर आ रहे हैं स्पीकर नजर नहीं आएगा
पर नहीं आएगा इस साइड में से
अच्छा आ जाए
बट वहाँ पे रखने के कुछ नहीं
only one this How are you? Thanks for coming.
Protect the Chinese workers while they're doing the development. They figured they must have got the word too. This is not
No, don't win. You and the family.
They try to skirt it as much as they can. But anyway, I'm saying something that they
So after you sleep, you just call me.
I thought I told you. Communist Party, Japanese Communist Party newspaper. Oh, look, subscription over 2 million. Flyers. Not everything. Turns out he and his boss, they have an office right over the press box. Well, oh, your home local office. No, not at all. But I follow up with it.
कितने बजे
और लोग आएंगे और लोग आ रहे हैं हमारे सब स्पीकर सारे
कुमार is listening.
ठीक है मेरे 2 more minutes
At that time email.
आप MC कर रहे हैं ना आप MC को आप कर रहे हैं
MC, yeah.
okay so maybe just announce the 2 minutes
We're just waiting for another last speaker to come. We'll start in
meanwhile they can
yeah.
tell them we have a great
Same
response
with the speaker is Kumar of the Amnesty International. Oh yeah. Kumar, you're awaiting.
We're just waiting for one more speaker yet, so we'll be there in just a moment.
There. Kumar was come. Yes,
okay.
right.
I think it was suspect.
Ask him. Yeah.
It's been ages.
Everybody was.
सब लोग वहीं पे बिठा दिया वहाँ पे थोड़ा जगह कम है जगह कम है
ठीक है.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Sylvia Russell. I'll be leading today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the African Students Association. They've been really generous in allowing me to set this up. I'd also like to thank everyone who's here today. Your presence here shows us how much the community cares about the rights both here and around the world. So thank you. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Sylvia Russell. I'm a second-year student at Penn State University studying molecular biology. Since I was a child, I knew that science was going to be my career, but my true passion has always been for human and civil rights. My grandfather, Dr. Robert Darius, when he was 17, he came here from Balochistan. When I turned 17, he informed me of the current political situation in Balochistan, and I was absolutely appalled. The people of Balochistan have very few schools and hospitals. Many Baloch have exposed this issue and in turn created resistance groups and movements advocating for the liberation of their country from Pakistan. But many of the people in these liberation movements are targeted by the government for speaking out for their freedom. Reports of torture, illegal abductions, and murders by the inter-services intelligence have spread across the region. And personally, I'm appalled that this situation has not received as much international attention as it should. So that is why the American Friends of Balochistan organize events like these. The world deserves to know about what's happening in Balochistan. The American Friends of Balochistan is a nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C., and the goal is to end human rights abuses in Balochistan by both the state and non-state actors. The AFB unites Baloch and Americans from different backgrounds to protect democracy and secularism in Balochistan. Briefly put, the AFB has six-point agenda of action. The first point is to monitor and highlight the human rights conditions in Balochistan and interface with existing human rights organizations who rarely consider Balochistan, so as to help break the silence that facilitates impunity for those who kill and torture. The second point of action is to work with U.S. Congress for the formation of a Baloch caucus with the aim to send a fact-finding mission to Balochistan and reintroduce a solution on the right to self-determination in the House of Representatives. The third point is to collaborate with think tanks to promote research on Baluch politics, society, and culture. The fourth point is to reach out to US media so that there's more awareness about Balochistan in the US. The fifth point is to endeavor for the launch of Baluch language services by the Voice of America so that the world better understands the ground realities in Balochistan. And their sixth and final point is to promote visits by Baluch scholars, writers, and intellectuals to the United States. This event is an example of that. So before I proceed further, just an announcement that the Director of Public Relations, Jane Wesner, could not make it today. She was unwell. So I'd like to welcome Ambar Khan, the founder and president of American Friends of Balochistan. He's a Baluch freelance journalist, commentator, and a freedom activist. Born in Rangoon, Burma, to an X-rated Baluch family, he has worked as a journalist in newsrooms in Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, and here in the United States. His writings on Balochistan, minority rights, and the environment have appeared in a number of international publications. 4 members of his family, an uncle and 3 cousins, were tortured by the Inter-Services Intelligence for their belief in the freedom of Balochistan. He's organized many protests and conferences, both here in Washington, D.C. and in Geneva, Switzerland. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Amar.
Thanks everyone for coming today. Thank you, very honorable speakers, very learned speakers. Talking about Balochistan, the capital of the United States, at a time of Make America Great Again, is like talking about love in the time of cholera. But of course, love is possible even during cholera, hence we are all here. I thank you all. I have come here to appeal to our common humanity as the Baluch people are facing crimes against humanity at the hands of Pakistan deep state due to a deadly 54 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. My profuse thanks to the Afghan Students Association for sponsoring this event. Afghan and Baluch are like blood and bone. However, a Twitter account close to the military intelligence of Pakistan was threatening Afghanistan on a baseless charge that the Afghan embassy here is funding the American Friends of Balochistan, simply because the Afghan Student Association sponsored the event today. And that sponsorship meant we get $100 discount on the room rent. So when I went to see Ambassador Hamdullah Mohib yesterday, my main question to him was, where is my money? Balochistan existed with this name 1,000 years before the British carved Pakistan out of India in 1947. Nicholas Middle, a writer in Washington, D.C., in his book, To Live or Perish Forever, writes lucidly, the Baloch people parted ways from their Kurdish brethren in the mountains of modern-day Syria, Turkey, and Iran, and migrated to modern-day Balochistan. Like the Kurds, the Baloch live beyond the borders of today's nation-states. Here Middle made a small mistake. He referred to the Baloch as Balochis. So you see, Balochi is the language. Many Westerners make this mistake. And Baloch is the people. Balochistan had 2 houses of parliament, and both of them unanimously rejected the idea of accession to Pakistan. One of the founders of modern Baloch nationalism, the late Mir Gosbaks Bisinjo, was a family friend. In his speech to the lower house of parliament, or Darul Awam, on December 12, 1947, He rejected the idea of Balochistan's merger with Pakistan and said, quote, they Pakistanis say we must join Pakistan for economic reasons. That is absurd. We may not have hard currency, but we have numerous means of income. We have minerals, we have petroleum, we have ports. We should not be made slaves on the pretext of economic viability. We can survive without Pakistan. We can prosper outside Pakistan. But the question is, what Pakistan would be without us? Earlier than that, this was December 12, 1947. Earlier than that, the New York Times of August 11 reported and showed a map of the Indian subcontinent that shows Kalat state of Balochistan separate from Pakistan. Karachi, then the notables of Sindh met at Karachi. See, this was in Balochistan, both the Darul Awam and Diwan-e-Am and the Diwan-e-Khas, the House of Commons and House of Lords, both had rejected the idea of merging with Pakistan. And in Karachi, the notables of Sindh, they met, and they too had unanimously rejected the idea of merging with Pakistan. Pakistan had recognized Kalat status under a standstill agreement that was signed on this very date, August 11, 1947. However, 7.5 months later, 1948, an army officer named Akbar Khan forced the Kalat ruler to sign the instruments of accession in violation of the standstill agreement between Balochistan and Pakistan. The flag of Kalat state flew over our family home in old Karachi called Gandhi Garden, because my uncle was named as the ambassador on August 11 to the future country of Pakistan. So the were our house from August 11, 1947 until March 27, 1948, when the standstill agreements were violated. One of my cousins might still be having that old flag. Balochistan is 44% of Pakistan's landmass and less than 10% of the population, extremely rich land with the poorest inhabitants. If Balochistan's resources are properly utilized, Balochistan GDP would be equal to the size of Switzerland, according to one of the best Bhuttos in the world, Fatma Bhutto, an author and scholar and intellectual. Other reports corroborate this. Quote, Balochistan has some 19 trillion cubic feet of undeveloped gas reserves, 6 trillion barrels of undeveloped oil reserves, and extensive copper and gold deposits that cannot be developed until a political accommodation is reached with the Baruch, wrote now deceased US scholar Select S. Harrison in his 2009 report, Pakistan, the State of the Union. We used to call him Uncle of the Baluch. He passed away December last year. Balochistan is quite sexy, strategically speaking, as its nearly 500-mile long coastline forms the northern lip of the Straits of Hormuz, the vital sea lane for Gulf oil. It is for this reason Pakistan generals want Balochistan, but not the Baluch. An ill name and hang him. Fleck Harrison, in his report, recalled his conversation with Pakistan's late dictator on March 8, 1980, in which the dictator, referring to the Baluch, said, almost savages, not like the rest of us, General Zia said. His successor, who came after 4 elected governments were dismissed, named General Pervez Musharraf. In an interview with The Guardian, he called Baloch politician and governor and chief minister of Balochistan, Nawab Akbar Khan Bhutti, a pygmy. As I speak, Pakistan generals are killing the Baloch, dumping our bodies, shooting the civilians from helicopters, abducting us, perpetrating the most degrading and dehumanizing, feeding feces to our youth, and even leaving feces in their mouths after torturing them to death, using sodomy as an instrument of state terror, committing extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detention, throwing our dead from helicopters to create mass scare, continuing their policy of enforced disappearances, making Balochistan the world capital of enforced disappearances, like Argentina and Chile were 40 years ago. Burning homes and livestock, poisoning water ponds, and testing nuclear weapons on our sacred lands against Baloch wishes. The deep state doesn't want the outside world to know about their secret dirty war, and the Pakistan media is too afraid of the military truth. Baloch rose up in revolt against Islamabad 4 times in the past: 1948, 1952, 1962, and 1973. Time on the army brutalities that started on March 17, 2005, Dera Bukti has broken all past records in its brutality. In the attack on Dera Bukti, as many as 72 civilians, of whom 33 were minority Hindus, the first among natives of Balochistan. Hindus lived closest to the home of Nawab Bukti 79, who was assassinated on Musharraf's orders. Nawab Bukti was quite, and he used to joke that both the Huris and the Gilmans in heaven won't have any home. Bukti was an interesting leader. He was the first to oppose the China-Pakistan economic corridor and called for Baloch right to be the owners of their resources and ports and masters of their own destiny. Just 20 days ago, the deep state's blue-eyed boy, Senator Mushahid Hussain, the Balochistan Chief Minister, Sardar Sanaullah Zairi, though the main person running the show in Balochistan is not the Chief Minister, but the Corps Commander, Lieutenant General Amir Riaz. The dirty show boy, Sardar Sanaullah Zairi, should have been in jail, not the Chief Minister's house, as he killed his eldest brother, Zairi, of 80 people with his own hands, but never got arrested. In one case, he killed a teacher from his sub-tribe of Jataks, execution style, with a sword, as the teacher had ridiculed him in public for not keeping his election promises. Crimes against humanity by the military intelligence, ISI, Southern Command of the Pakistan Army, and frontier corps in Balochistan is not happening in isolation. In recent days, there has been a spike in enforced disappearances of Sindhi activists. Advice for Sindhi missing person, Unhal Sario, and relatives of exiled Sindhi leader Shafi Porfar disappeared. the blasphemy cases against Hindus, Christians, and Ahmadis that they are using enjoy the blessings of the deep state. They can kill, when the deep state can kill and remove premiers, this certainly can do away with the blasphemy laws. The forcible conversion and marriages of Hindu and Christian minor girls is actually rape of minors in Pakistan, happening on a daily basis. Pakistani deep state hands are red, not only with the blood of Baloch, but also Afghan and Indian blood. Balochistan landed in all this blood and tears because India betrayed Balochistan in 1947. But this is now changing ever since the speech of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the historic Red Fort on August 15, 2016. I am appealing today to all Americans of goodwill in this room to help end crimes against humanity in Balochistan in whatever way you can. You may please demand two things immediately. With the military intelligence, the inter-services intelligence, Frontier Corps, and the Southern Command of Pakistan Army in Balochistan that is calling the shots there. The Leahy Amendment, which is the US law, US to do business with such entities affiliated with the foreign army who care two hoots about human rights. And I ask all of you guys who are present here to please write to your congressmen to press for a congressional fact-finding mission to Balochistan. I also urge you to please join the American Friends of Balochistan, a non-profit registered. I had launched it many years ago, but I could not have done it without the support and help of my good Brahman friend, Krishna Gujipati. Please catch hold of Najib Khan, Somya Sundar Chaudhary, or Habib Ashna to sign you up. I also like to make a point here. Today in this room, I have a young man who was almost shot and killed by the ISI. He survived. He was shot and killed. He was almost shot and killed because he supported the Baloch people, and he's the Pashtun. I'm also indebted to all the friends who came from New York, my friend Amadullah Narvi, Honorable Dr. Robert Darius, who lives in Pennsylvania. And I am extremely indebted to all of you who came here today. Thank you so very much.
I'd like to welcome Professor C. Christine Fair, a Provost Distinguished Associate Professor in the Security Studies Program at Georgetown University. Her research focuses on political and military affairs in South Asia, and she has authored and co-authored and co-edited several books, including Pakistan's Enduring Challenges, Ground, Counterinsurgency Operations in Sacred Spaces. Her current book is titled Lakshari Taiba in its own words.
While connected.
To get my computer, usually I have with me a black cat to remind people that we have a president that assaults women, but I forgot to bring her. So I think my computer
Why are they?
We can.
No, it's coming in. Coming in. It's okay.
Yep. Legal.
Light open or close?
So, I am not a human rights activist. That's not why I'm here. I'm a professor. I deal in political and military issues. And I want to talk about CPEC. I suppose its formal name is the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but I have a more appropriate name. It's called Colonizing Pakistan to Enrich China. And in my discussion, you'll get some idea why I think this name is more appropriate. So to understand what CPEC is, it might be useful. This is actually from The Economist. This is not terribly accurate, but it gives you an idea of this so-called One Belt, One Road initiative that China's putting forward. And you can see, at least schematically, and again, these are not terribly accurate representations of the ground lines of communication, but you still get the idea that China is trying to reach out into Western Europe, Russia through this route. It also was planning various sea routes. It also has various internal ground lines of communication. Again, to give you an idea of how little attention The Economist pays to facts, the so-called CPEC, which is importantly routed and anchored to water, isn't even depicted accurately in this map. So, obviously, The Economist got this wrong. But it gives you an idea of the idea that CPEC is really just one, what we call G-log or ground line of communication among several that the Chinese are aiming for. Incidentally, my friends who study China also think that One Belt, One Road is also a bunch of bullocks, that this is generally very overhyped. I have to take their word for it because I don't actually study China, I study South Asia. But let's take a closer look at where what's called the Southern Corridor, CPEC, fits in with China, because it gives you a better idea of some of the strategic goals that China has in putting this forward. And as I've argued in a recent piece in Foreign Affairs titled Pakistan Can't Afford China's Friendship, I lay out that this is actually not an economically viable corridor. And I'm actually going to get into a little bit of those specifics here in the next few minutes. So one strategic goal that China has with CPEC, and you can see it here, Kashgar. This is the area where the Chinese are having a lot of problems with Islamist insurgency, uprising, whatever your preferred nomenclature is, associated with the Uyghurs. And so what China hopes to do with Xinjiang is what it did with Tibet, which is to try to integrate it through various means with the rest of China. What China also wants to do, and this is my surmisal, but many people tend to agree with me, itself is very worried about the role of Pakistan, and we all know it. I mean, this is not, if there's any ISI Wallas in the room, save your howls for later, I don't care. We all know that Pakistan raises, nurtures, fosters, trains, pays, deploys Islamist militants to pursue its interests in both Afghanistan and India. The problem is that some of these groups have also been training the Uyghurs. If you're knowledgeable about what China has done in South Asia, it even went so far right before 2001 to ink a deal with the Taliban and also Osama bin Laden, saying, you can do whatever you want to do, just don't do it in China. Look back at many of Osama bin Laden's speeches, what's really quite curious is that no matter what the Chinese were doing in Xinjiang, which is really quite horrible, you're not going to find Osama bin Laden ever mentioning China. Pakistan's also very quiet about the abuses that China very visibly and publicly perpetrates against its Muslims. So one of the goals, and this is something that Andrew Small also puts forward in his superb book, I might add, on the Chinese-Pakistan relationship. It has absolutely no contender in the market. It's really, really worth getting and reading, is that China hopes that by fully integrating Pakistan its economic system, that it can actually put pressure on Pakistan on things that matter. And Pakistanis who are actually paying attention to what happened in Sri Lanka, they already understand that. And if you don't know what happened in Sri Lanka, China offered Sri Lanka what it's offering Pakistan at outrageous prices. The debt that Sri Lanka owes to the Chinese is in excess of the value of the assets that were actually built on the ground. And what China is basically saying is, fine, you can't pay us, so give us equity. Pakistanis that are gushing with enthusiasm with CPEC should probably clue up, stop smoking the good stuff, and take a really hard look at what has happened to this model in Sri Lanka. So it really has been a form of colonization of sorts. So this gives you some idea where CPEC fits in with what China's goals may be domestically, but also how it might be anticipating managing some of these persistent problems that emanates out of Pakistan. And of course, Afghanistan and India knows well the consequences of Pakistan's terror game. What happens in Pakistan never stays in Pakistan. One of the things about CPEC is that there's absolutely no transparency. Pakistani officials have complained about this. The State Bank of Pakistan has complained about this. Parliamentarians have complained. This is actually taken from a Pakistani website that we have to some kind of official game plan was actually leaked and published in some measure by Dawn a few months back. The Chinese and the Pakistanis, by extension, have been absolutely opaque about what this thing is. We don't really have an idea what projects are really going to be there. The different debates amongst the different political stakeholders about realignments of the roads, all of this is taking place without any public scrutiny. And this is actually very much in keeping with the way in which China conducts these kinds of outreaches, or these economic countries where it operates. Essentially, China sets the price. China decides who the vendor is going to be, and then Pakistan has to pay it. So where we're really going to see the benefit from this economically, doing business in Pakistan or perhaps South Asia more generally, deals of this nature are cut with very lucrative bribes being paid. So what we're really going to see is there's going to be a lot of elite capture, and there's going to be a lot of inter-elite divisions of the spoils, but we're probably not going to see a lot of local economic benefit deriving from these projects. Why? Well, the Chinese come in with their own employees. I've been going to Pakistan. I can no longer go back. I was PNG'd, and I haven't been back since 2013, but I've been going there from 91 to 2013. And I remember when I would take the GT road from, say, Lahore to Islamabad. GT road was festooned with dhabas, which is, by the way, the best place to ever get food, because the dhabas have awesome food, awesome tea. But you would also have these small truck repairs. Essentially, you would have these businesses sprouting along the GT road to support all of the personal as well as heavy transport travel all along there. And obviously, you would have places where the truck drivers could sleep and so forth. When they've replaced the GT road with these large motorways, all of the economic activity that was on the GT road has been strangled, because who wants to go a route that's going to take you several hours longer is actually much more damaging for your vehicle. But when you go along these motorways, you see very little economic activity. There'll be at very designated places, restaurants where everything is co-located, and there aren't that many of them along the motorway. So what we'll probably see is perhaps some economic activity from building the roads and upkeeping the upkeep of the roads. But most of these contracts, when the Chinese come in, the Chinese actually bring in their own employees. And in fact, the Chinese don't even source food locally, which has been one of the perennial complaints of Pakistanis, is that they come in, they don't even buy local vegetables. I remember one person complaining that they even brought in their own potatoes. So there's quite a bit of a culture clash. And at the Anak copper mine, there was also a bit of a flap when the Chinese brought in some pigs, because of course, Chinese enjoy eating the fruit of the swine, as do I, but I'm not eating it there in Pakistan or Afghanistan. So roads are one of the things that's been discussed heavily. They're also talking about these economic zones. And again, it's very dubious who's going to support these, who's going to benefit from these economic zones. And there's a lot of within and among the provinces about where these things are going to be located. One of the concerns for peripheral populations, and I think, and that's what I'm going to refer to the Baloch. Balochistan, by the way, is about 60% of Pakistan's land mass. It's fewer than 5% of the population, and not all of those, by the way, are Baloch. We haven't had a census in Pakistan since 1998. Data that I've collected suggests that Baloch are no longer even a majority in Balochistan. So it's actually very easy to completely isolate Baloch interests because they have very little power aggregated at the capital. They only have equal representation in the Senate, and the Senate doesn't have a lot of power in Pakistan. So it's very easy to bulldoze a place like Balochistan because it is so poorly or so thinly populated, and the population tends to be clumped in these urban areas. So let's just think now for a second to get an idea of how harebrained CPEC is from a commercial point of view. In some sense, what China's going to get from it, it already has. China already has this major GLOC, which is to say a ground line of communication. The Karakoram Highway, this was one of the flagship projects when Pakistan and China settled their border, principally by Pakistan ceding land to China illegally, land which actually belongs to India, which that's another entire lecture. And then the system of highways that come down to this port in Karachi. The one thing that I want you to know is that Pakistan does not lack capacity. This port that they're building at Gwadar with Chinese assistance, it's not because Karachi is cramped. In fact, Karachi is under capacity. So this raises a very puzzling commercial question. Why do you need this port at Karachi if Karachi is not experiencing a capacity problem, right? So this is flag number one, why what's happening here at Gwadar is not, in fact, commercially driven. Andrew Small notes in his book that it takes about 6 times as much to move a barrel of crude through this GLOC than it does some of the other GLOCs that I showed you on the previous slide, these internal GLOCs moving things through China. This is not economically viable. It isn't being deluged with demand, and it's not. We then have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of this GLOC? And I'm going to the end, but let me just give you a little bit more granularity about how uncommercially tenuous, how uncommercially viable this thing is. As I said in the previous map, CPEC really has what I call 2 choke points. Is when when this route is entering Pakistan from the north. Anyone been on the KKH in this room? Any seasoned backpackers? Anyone? All right. Well, I'm going to show you some pictures. It's absolutely hair-raising. So basically you've got this incredibly tiny road. It's not really wide enough for 2 vehicles, much less large transport vehicles. And when you look down the ravine, you see just a lot of dead vehicles. And by dead vehicles, I also mean the passengers that went over the ravine with them. The death toll that it took building the KKH is absolutely enormous. And in the end, most of that fell on the Chinese because the Pakistanis couldn't keep up with it. That part of the road is very vulnerable to landslides. I know because I've been through landslides on the KKH. They try to get them cleared as quickly as possible, but it's still very harrowing. And so if you are a transport trucker, you do run the risk of not only you, but your truck and everything that you're carrying being washed over into the ravine. At one point, and you have to actually admire the pluckiness of Pakistanis, an entire stretch of it is a consequence of rains actually just washed out. And so Pakistan decided to just call it a lake. But in fact, this is the result of a very nasty landslide. And what you actually had to do to continue your travel on the CPEC, on the KKH, is you had to put your conveyance onto these barges. Now, these are pictures that are taken from the internet. These are not my pictures, because when I was there, this hadn't actually happened yet. But I also think there's a lot of nonsense going on in this picture, because anyone who has seen vehicles in Pakistan, these things are always full. They're usually over full. So I am very skeptical, practically empty. So I would be very skeptical that you could actually get 4 of these trucks loaded on one of these barges. This problem has been overcome in April of 2015. This very lovely structure that basically goes over this. Some of my Indian friends, when I presented this at some of the military academies, said, "Oh, those are very bombable." Just don't shoot the messenger. I'm just letting you know. But this is a very elegant solution, but it doesn't actually fix the very fundamental problem that the KKH, as built, is not conducive to heavy traffic. And this brings us to here's a couple of pictures of some of these landslides that I was telling you about. And what actually happens is that in many cases, if you are on a bus, and this has happened to me, and it sucks a lot, I might add, you get off the bus, travel over the landslide, and then the other bus that's doing the same thing, you get on that bus, you basically pay the same fare. Yeah, you're getting ripped off, but at least you're not killed in a landslide, and you move on your way. So it's an elegant solution for that particular problem, the thing that they renamed a lake. A very serious problem with the KKH. For it to be truly viable, you're going to have to do a lot of expansion. And by expansion, I mean blowing up a lot of mountains. And this is actually, at the north, causing quite a bit of distress among the residents of what's called Balochistan. They, like the Baloch, they have similarities with the Baloch in the sense that actually fit in the mainstream constitution of Pakistan. And the reason for that is that they are part of this this chunk of land that Pakistan disputes. And I'm picking that language very carefully. India actually has the instrument of secession for all of Kashmir because Pakistan used a bunch of tribal marauders to invade and illegally invade and seize land. Pakistan now controls, well, after that war, controlled about 30% of it. And so this is part of that historical dispute. So that's one of the reasons why Pakistan didn't want to put it into its constitution, because it claimed that this land is still in dispute. Stop it, by the way, from ceding part of that territory to the Chinese. So this is really sort of like a political hijinks more than anything else. But it does mean that they're in constitutional limbo. It means that they're excluded from the parliament. It's just very different situation from the Baloch. There are more of them, but it's also very easy to run roughshod over their equities. Very interestingly enough, the Chinese are putting pressure upon the Pakistanis to actually make this an official province. And there are pros and there are cons, which are sort of beyond the ambit of this discussion. But the people of Gilgit-Baltistan, they have many of the same fears that people in Balochistan have, which is devastating for our environment. And indeed, for them to engage in the kind of excavation that they need to make the KKH viable, there's going to be a lot of economic degradation. Number of questions about water, which is a perennial problem in Pakistan. It's even more acute, by the way, for Balochistan. And they fear, rightly so, that promises of jobs are going to be illusory because we know the Chinese model. So it hasn't been covered at all. So at least we hear Human Rights Watch, International Crisis Group, amongst others, have issued reports about the crisis in Balochistan. We actually have heard very little about the very repressive and oppressive state crackdown on protesters in Gilgit-Baltistan. I mean, the Chinese, what the Chinese want, the Pakistanis are going to facilitate. I'm not going to let any Pakistani protester get in the way of that. We have these political constraints, which is, while you have the Gilgit-Baltistanis that are cut out, you still have a lot of contestation from the other provinces about where these things are going to be aligned. But like I said, the Pakistanis have absolutely no fear of using force, and quite frankly, they've never had to confront any consequences for their use of force, which is, I think, one of the discussions that we should be having here is Leahy amendments, right? This should certainly come up in our discussion of Balochistan, which I'm going to pivot to now. The southern choke point is Gwadar. and it has had a very long history. There's nothing new about this. But this has been this exercise, which currently the Chinese are running. What's missing from this picture? Any of you naval aficionados? Yeah, exactly. No one wants to park their canoe in water. Now, there's a couple of reasons why no one wants to park their canoe in water. Again, why would you when you have all of this other commercial infrastructure at Karachi, which is already set up, right? You can park the ship, offload your goods, and then put them onto some Pashtun mafia-dominated jingle trucks, and you're on your way. You don't have any of this happening in water. Well, why don't you have this happening in water? Well, there's a bunch of reasons for that. Well, first of all, there has been, since 2005, so Balochistan is Amr said, I don't agree with all of the historical points that he put out there. I have a somewhat different interpretation of this. But what we can agree on is that Balochistan is not like Kashmir. Kashmir was a princely state. Kashmir had its relationship with colonial India, which in Calcutta and then later in Delhi. Balochistan, by the way, this wasn't all of Balochistan. They were parts of Balochistan. The Khan of Kalad in particular had his actually with London. And so technically, the Khan of Kalad, his territory did not fall under the Indian Independence Act of 1946. So it's a very different history. And there have been different Baloch leaders that had different opinions about being in or out of the Pakistani Union. But what we do know, it didn't really matter what those leaders thought. The Pakistanis were never going to let them go because the Pakistanis have demonstrated repeatedly that they will use as much force as possible to suppress any Baloch uprising. So there have been actually long periods of quiet in Balochistan. The current crisis that we are experiencing in Balochistan began in 2005 with the rape of a doctor that involved Pakistani army personnel, including an officer. And the army tried to hush it up and move on, but that just wasn't gonna happen. So that was very much the match that set this off. And Musharraf actually came here and said, some incredibly misogynist things about this rape victim, that she made it up for publicity. I think Musharraf and Trump would actually get along fabulously. They might actually exchange tips on how to sexually assault and get away with it. But that's neither here nor there. So a couple of other issues about this water project. So as I had indicated, we haven't had a census in Pakistan since 1998, and that census itself was very much was also delayed by many years because the Pakistanis were cognizant that there were still many Afghans that were living in Pakistan, and they had hoped those Afghans would go back to Afghanistan so that you wouldn't skew the demographics in Balochistan and WFP. So the Pakistanis continue to delay the census for reasons that are not so dissimilar, right? Because we still have a lot of displacement from Afghanistan. And there are other issues about, is Sindh, right now Sindh is the second largest province. So if you have massive shifts in population centers, do you have to rethink representation, for example, in the National Assembly? So there are, by the way, the U.S. is really asinine about our census, right? Republicans have typically resisted doing statistical sampling because it would actually show that we have many more people of color who are often more difficult to track down and less responsive to the things that are mailed out. And so why would Republicans care about that? Well, those people tend to vote Democratic. So I don't want you to come away thinking that Pakistan is the only one that politicizes its census. Right now, although we are too busy distracted by what Tweedledee and Tweedlethum is doing, we have a very important debate right now about gerrymandering and how we do our census. So Pakistan is in no way alone in politicizing this really important function that should be unpoliticized, but it's not for a variety of reasons. So from the Baloch point of view, right now, when I have presented my data on Balochistan, I get a lot of pushback because it shows that they're probably not a majority in Balochistan. Baloch would like to believe that they are a majority. I suspect they aren't. Why is that important, right? Because it is called Balochistan. But the other important that is in Balochistan are Pashtuns. And this is actually, there's a Baloch Pashtun conflict in Balochistan, as much as there is a competition between the Baloch and the state. So one of the things that's very frustrating, and as somebody who simply analyzes this conflict, it's absolutely mysterious to me why the Pakistani state behaves in this way. The Balochistan, as Amar had already noted, has a lot of oil, gas, and minerals. However, when the state purchases gas from Balochistan, it is at a far lower price than when they purchase gas from nearby Sindh. There's no reason, there's no market reason for this. This is just the bullying, extractive policy of the Pakistani state. Again, there is no reason from a point of view of nation building why Pakistan would do this. They take that gas from Balochistan and they take it to the Punjab, right? Now the Punjab is not only the country's most populous province, it's also where the bulk of Pakistan's military infrastructure is, right? All but a few cores. You have a core that's based in Peshawar, a core that's based in Karachi, and a core that's based in Quetta. Everything else is based in the Punjab. So if you are Baloch, you get your gas ripped off, essentially. You're forced to sell it to the Pakistani state at a decreased price for no obvious reason, and that the bully state could do this, and you don't even have gas hookups. And it's really quite astonishing. When you go and look at the UNDP reports, how few Baloch have access to gas or electricity or the kinds of amenities that people living in Lahore take for granted, even though they have the resources that are fueling the growth of other provinces. And so this has certainly been one of the perennial complaints that Baloch have with the state, is that you're taking the resources and we don't benefit from it, and also you're making us sell at a really lousy price. So for many Baloch, the only time that they're actually going to get electricity hookups is when a cantonment is actually being built in Balochistan. And why are they building a cantonment? Well, this kind of goes back to CPEC, right? The state is very interested in extracting these resources from Balochistan, and the Baloch are very, very willing to sabotage those efforts to do so. So they're building these cantonments to basically expand the military footprint. They're also hoping in building these cantonments that they're going to generate an interest in the army. I've written, large amount about this. Going back to why isn't there even a canoe parked at water? Well, there's an enormous shortage of water. So water itself was a very small fishing village. In its largest vision, several million people, at least 2 million, there is just not enough water to support this kind of expansion, full stop. And there are desalinization plants, one of which actually exists but is not functioning for whatever reason. Without water, this expansion of water is just absolutely preposterous. And you have this constant resistance to water. There have been a number of attacks against Chinese employees. Responded very, very brutally. One of the things that they're setting up is what's called a CPEC force, or I call it a CPEC farce, because it's not clear how they're going to generate the manpower. And the Pakistanis haven't been clear about how large the CPEC farce is going to be. But one of the things that that's going to do, of course, is add cost. Because any of these products that will be generated by CPEC, they're obviously going to be passed on to the buyer. One of the most disturbing things that the Pakistanis have done is that they have used Islamist militant organizations to colonize the Baloch. And this is also where some of the Baloch activists agree, because I actually have data. One of the things that many Baloch activists will say to get people to support their position is that they are secular. Now, historically, at least among the activists and the militants, this has been true. In contrast to these other organizations that are explicitly Islamist, the various Baloch militant organizations have mobilized on their ethnic grounds. But this does not say anything about the Baloch themselves, who are not in these organizations. And if you look at madrasa expansion in Balochistan has been off the charts. And one of the reasons is that Balochistan we only have recent data. So if we take the qualitative data at face value, always been resistance to this Islamizing state project. We also saw it in East Pakistan. So if you're sitting there in Rawalpindi or Ampara, which is where the ISI is hanging out, you can get around this is if you can persuade Baloch of the importance of the Islamic project of the state. And some of the organizations that they have to do this are obviously these Deobandi madrasas. They have a very large appeal. But also we're seeing increasingly Baloch are also availing of them. This organization, LET, Lashkar-e-Taiba, by the way, they just last week announced that they're now floating a political party. They've been very active. And the Pakistani state has done everything it can to help LET expand its presence in Balochistan. So, for example, during a very nasty earthquake a few years back, but no other organization in, other Falah and Sania Foundation, which is affiliated with LET, and I have numerous quotes of Hafiz Saeed saying that we're the only ones that can fix Balochistan, we're the only ones that can convince the Baloch of the importance of Islam and the state and so forth. But let me just give you, and then I'm going to conclude, but let me just give you a sense of what the data actually is saying. By the way, this is a very large survey, 14,000 people in Pakistan. That's one of the largest surveys of this kind. This is not a slide that's interesting, but let me give you this. These are some of the issues that we typically think of as, quote, Punjabi. So this is Balochistan, and we've separated it from Baloch and non-Baloch. And you can see the numbers in Balochistan are large. We have over 2,000 people in Balochistan itself. And this is throughout Pakistan, Baloch, non-Baloch. And then I'm comparing Baloch to Punjabis, because typically things like liberating Kashmir from India is seen as a Punjabi project, because most of the militant groups that Pakistan dispatches are Punjabi contingent. And that's for a number of historical reasons. And the other one is protecting Muslims beyond Kashmir from Hindu oppression, right? But what you actually see, Punjabis throughout Pakistan, they're statistically the same, right? They're just as likely to support this goal as Punjabis. And they're statistically just as likely to support it as every other non-Baloch. And there's no difference between Baloch and non-Baloch in Balochistan itself. This is true for almost every single metric we looked at, including some things that I thought we would really see a difference. My RA on this is Pakistani, and even he was very surprised. When we look at, quote, making Pakistan truly Sharia compliant, the differences are small, they're statistically significant, but they're meaningless. They're significant only because the numbers are so large. It's 4.5 versus 4.4. Of apostates and hypocrites. So these would be munafiqeen, folks that have been takfired. The numbers are 4.5 versus 4.3. The numbers are large, but they're statistically meaningless. And so what I argue, we see a similar thing when we're looking at support, even for the Afghan Taliban. Support for the Afghan, they are statistically the same. Now, what is interesting for support for the Afghan Taliban is that in Balochistan, the differences are quite large. So the non-Baloch are much more supportive of the Afghan Taliban than are the Baloch. And why is Balochistan important? Because that's where the Quetta, Quetta is in Balochistan, and it's the eponymous Shura of the Taliban. But even on something as terrible as supporting the Sipe-Sabe Pakistan, who brutalize and murder Shias, Ahmadis, and others in Pakistan, it's 2.4 versus 2, right? So what I argue is that whatever this idea is, that there was this secular Baloch, secular Balochistan in some past, what we can say today is that that's no longer the prevailing sentiment that exists. And perhaps it's because of these state efforts. We can't really know because we don't have this historical data. So in conclusion, there are some challenges. In fact, I'm going to argue that CPEC is over-constrained by these challenges I've already discussed. There's some opportunities. So the challenge is we're really looking at security. And I hate to tell my Baloch friends, the Pakistanis are going to kill you. They'll kill every last Baloch in Balochistan to make Balochistan safe for Chinese exploitation. And I hate to say also, if we even had a stable, sane government that knew where Balochistan was on a map, they haven't cared, right? I mean, Leahy Amendment is a tool that we have. Everything that has been reported against the Frontier Corps, Frontier Corps one is in the FATA, the federally administered tribal areas, and the other is and also regular Army units going through here. They should have been slapped with Leahy long ago. The very high likelihood that our money and our weapons are being used by the Pakistanis to kill Baloch. I would also bet on it. If you have an opportunity to talk to your senators and your congressmen, write op-eds, really advocate that this is something we can do. There is no reason why we should be funding a military that with our money and with our weapons engages in these sorts of brutalities which are explicitly proscribed in our law. We are not allowed to give this assistance to units in armies or other security forces that engage in well-documented human rights abuses. We are turning our back as a part of our larger policy, which is, we could have a whole week seminar on how the US government enables Pakistani perfidy. There are, as I mentioned, political constraints, a lot of haggling both within provinces and between provinces about where these projects are going to go, about alignments of the roads. Geography and Mother Nature, as I showed you in those slides, are also very much conspiring against the viability of CPEC. Quite frankly, afford this. Pakistanis don't even know what they're paying for, and all they need to do is take a look at Sri Lanka to see this plum deal. Expectation for this, so allegedly these energy projects are low-hanging fruit, enormous energy problem. It's not, again, because of use, it's because of circular debt. People can't afford it. Pakistan also has distribution problems. By the time you build in the corruption, you build in the cost of the CPEC farce to protect the Chinese that are going to come and build this stuff, it's questionable whether or not this energy that's going to be produced is going to be any more affordable than those produced in plants that are ensnared in the so-called circular debt project. Economic zones could also be possible, but they're going to be really contingent upon sorting out the electricity problem, constraints. We might see improvement of road infrastructure, but it's also going to be constrained. As I mentioned, Pakistan's primary problem is not lack of capacity, which goes back to the overall question, what is CPEC for? There might be some possible improvement in rail. That's like saying, anything has less fat than bacon. Rails are so dilapidated. I mean, you could make jokes, but the Chinese effort so far. So, for example, they sold the Pakistanis a bunch of engines. The fact that the engines were not of suitable gauge as the gauge that Pakistanis use in their road. Water, in my view, is just not going to be what they say it is. It's not economically viable. It's not competitive with Karachi. And this, for me, when we look at the cost of how much the same barrel of crude in this GWAP vice another, the only thing that water makes sense to me to be is an alternative military base for China. And this becomes all the more important when you understand and you look at what China is doing elsewhere in the region. Just a few hundred kilometers from a base that a naval facility that India is helping to build in Iran called Chabahar. And so water being positioned as a listening post to see what's going on in Chabahar, which is also probably a listening post to see what's happening in water. But water, for all the reasons I noted, not only is it not a competitive alternative to Karachi, it's not a competitive alternative to Chabahar, right? Because you move your stuff off at Chabahar, you're moving through Iran, there's no insurgency in Iran, whether you like the regime or not, it's actually very safe to move your stuff through there. The Iranians have built the Zaran-Delaram connectivity, which links Chabahar to the ring road in Afghanistan. They've already outcompeted this CPEC structure, which again goes back to the induction that I'm making from this. the only utility is really gonna be military. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next guest speaker today is Najib Khan, a Pashtun native who has come all the way from Albany, New York. He sees himself as a successor to his uncle, who was assassinated in 1990 in Kabul by the Pakistani ISI. Sure enough, Najib survived a nearly fatal attack by the same group in October of 2013 in Quetta, the capital of Balochistan. Talk on CPEC at a prominent Baloch university. He has recently graduated from the State University of New York with a degree in economics forecasting. Please welcome Najib.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Najib Khan. I was born in a Pashtun family, as she said, basically as a Kaka tribe in district Abdullah, which is central Afghanistan. I lived most of my life in Quetta City, which is the capital of Balochistan. My family has been closely associated with the struggle for Pashtun rights, reforms, freedom of the oppressed nation in Pakistan. My uncle was assassinated in 1990 in Kabul intelligence for being a Pashtun patriot. I have always seen myself as a successor. In 2011, I joined Balochistan University of Information Technology, Engineering and Management Sciences as a lecturer. And during my work tenure, I saw firsthand horrible human rights abuse in Balochistan by the Pakistani military intelligence and spy services, the ISI, against the Baloch students, professors, and I have, with my own eyes, have seen dead bodies, tortured, my own students and co-workers by the hand of those Pakistani brutal army. Watching these atrocities and human rights abuses brought me closer to the Baloch freedom movement. I remember August and September of 2013 were the toughest time of my professional career and even of my life. I founded an academic staff association in Butons, which is basically that university, to encourage the lecturers, teachers of the different universities and colleges to come forward and speak for the Baloch rights and expose the Pakistan-China collaboration for those just have explained. And also the Gold Sandak project, the Gold Copper project, which are in Sandak and recordings. The manifesto of the association was obviously demanding the protection of our academic staff association, members, lecturers, students of the universities, and hold open discussions on the topics like right of Baloch, self-determination, the CPAC, and missing persons in Balochistan. Our work was relevant because most of those missing persons were students and professors of the universities. And just years before, one of the professor, very famous Baloch activist and professor of Balochistan University, Sabad Ashtiyari, was assassinated by the same intelligence agency. Founding member of that association at Bhutan, enormous pressure straight from the ISI Kuli Camp office, which is a very infamous torture camp of the ISI, created in Quetta Camp, and also from the Vice Chancellor office. The Vice Chancellor is basically, and particularly Balochistan universities are mainly appointed by the not from governor office, basically. In other part of Pakistan, they're usually appointed by chancellors. All our executive members were suspended. Many of them were sacked. Some of our cabinet members were jailed. I was not arrested, but were asked to sit in the security guard's office from 9 5 p.m. that I cannot communicate to any of the university members, professors, and lecturers. That the day when I was shot on October 6, 2013, when I was going home with our team at a local cafe. I was walking around 10 p.m. on a road called Patel Road, when two persons on a motorbike came closer to me, helmets, which usually in quite a city, people don't wear helmets when they're riding motorbikes. Quite suspicious for me, and I found one of those guys just took up a handgun, and I saw that. So before he opened a fight from within a narrow street, and he opened one fire which hit me on my shoulder, and I fell down. But I tried to run out, and thankfully I managed to flee. Meanwhile, he opened 3 more shots, and one of them I got in my hip. When I reached close to my house, my neighbors saw me all bloody, and they rushed me to the local government hospital, which they call Balochistan Civil Hospital. The bullet had pierced my hand and my leg. I was still in the hospital when the university called me and informed me that they have a letter for me. And later the same day, a clerk of the university came to the hospital and then handed over that letter to me, which I found was my termination letter from the university, including other executive members of the cabinet of that association, named Amar Khan Baloch and Farman Kaka. As I said, the vice chancellor in that university was appointed by the ISI. Usually the university's vice chancellor, they serve for 3 years in the universities, at the most 4 years, but this professor is serving till date, and he's been serving for almost 11 years. I was indeed expecting very horrible consequences for what I was speaking and what I was involved in, but honestly, I was not expecting any physical threat, and I was expecting it all will be limited to my professional career, which was already at its worst at that time. Luckily, I had a multiple entry visa back in 2013, and I had visits to the United States and European Unions for different conferences. So I'm here soon after I healed from those wounds. Today, I urge brothers and Afghans that to stand with the people of Balochistan, human rights of self-determination. And ISI religious proxies are equally determined to wipe out the Baloch educated youth across the. Thank you so much.
Our next guest speaker is T. Kumar. Mr. Kumar is Amnesty International USA's Advocacy Director for Asia and Europe, Human Rights Monitor around the world, and was the director of several refugee camps and refugee ships. As a consultant to the Quaker United Nations Office and was a professor at the Washington College of Law. He recently spoke at international forums and panels along with senior White House and UN officials. Kumar was a political prisoner for over 5 years in his native Sri Lanka. While he was in prison, he began his legal studies, eventually becoming an attorney and devoting his entire practice to defending political prisoners and advancing human rights. Please welcome.
Thank you very much for organizing this event and to invite Amnesty International to give a presentation about the current status of human rights in Balochistan. I know Amar, and I think this event is far more one of the best events, extremely important. So the title of this conference meeting is Untold Story. From the human rights perspective, serious abuses are happening in Pakistan. One particular province stands out to be exception provinces. Even the northwest frontier, Pakhtunkhwa area, under this attacks happening there. So what's happening in Balochistan? Why they have been singled out? We all should look into and to understand, to see what can be done to prevent these abuses and to protect people in Balochistan from being abused. The abuses are happening in Balochistan, but Baloch is targeting people of ethnic Baloch ethnicity. And the abuse happening against Baloch people for their ethnic identity, not religious because they are Muslims. It's ethnic identity. Others are there, like Pashtuns are there, they are not being targeted. Happening there. Extrajudicial executions, these are the killings without any by the security forces and their affiliates. Torture, imprisonment for no reason. Appearance is one of the main highlights I can bring. Of all these issues, disappearance stands out. The number of people who have disappeared and the manner in which they disappeared stands out. Definitely in Pakistan, even in the whole world. There are several other countries where a large number of people have disappeared, and Balochistan comes into that league of people who have disappeared. What is the meaning of disappearance? The standard meaning for this, why we call something called disappearance, is that a government agent, it could be police officer, military officer, their affiliate, pick up someone, and when the family try to search for them, they deny that they ever picked them up, pick that individual up. If someone is arrested in a normal way, you can find that person in the police. There will be a legal recourse. You can visit, you can challenge it in the court. But when it comes to disappearance, they will deny. Being prison is not a fun thing, but being as a disappeared in a detention center, secret detention center, is one of the horrible forms of abuse to that particular individual. What's happening to this person? That person is at mercy of the captors, him or her. In Balochistan, it's mostly him. And they can do whatever they want. Chop your fingers, whatever they like to do. And if you die, they can just throw you. Or they can just dump you somewhere, no one will know what happened to you. That is a tragedy happening to this particular individual. What happening to the family is another tragedy. Families don't know what happened. You know, if someone is arrested, they can always go and see and try to find legal recourse. Here they don't know. They'll be running from pole to pillar. What happened to my son? What happened to my husband? So the tragedy here is also to the people, to the families, are enormously painful compared to other abuses. This is a standard practice or standard experience the person disappeared undergoes, as well as the families undergo. But in Balochistan, there is difference. That's what it shocks us. I have been doing human rights work for quite some time, and quite a few countries around the world. I've never come across this particular piece in other countries. In other countries, the people who go and abduct do it during dark. No one can identify them. They will either wear masks, their jeeps or cars will not have number plates. So it's like you may be waiting in a bus stop, they can grab you. But in Balochistan, the security forces, especially the frontier corps or something, that particular unit, along with intelligence, unit, the frontier corps go in their full uniform, full view of everyone. They don't hide. Drag them from schools, universities, courts, lawyers have disappeared, teachers have disappeared, students have disappeared, journalists have disappeared. In public, they will collect, someone come grab and grab in front of us their identity, including their uniforms. That's different from other countries. They don't care. That shows we are not doing a good job in bringing attention to the plight of Baloch. Because if human rights organizations and people around the world must have raised the voice, then at least they'll be trying to hide and say, oh, we didn't do it, somebody else was doing it. They have some internal fight going on, that, or family fight. That's what other countries do. When they take, another disturbing part here is that they don't not only disappear everyone, like imagine 1,000 people were taken in a particular time frame. Whereabouts will not be known. You will find a couple of hundreds, if not hundreds, bodies thrown around Balochistan. They have been execution time, they were killed. Visible marks, torture marks in their bodies. Marks, something gruesome. And the bodies will be thrown. So these people don't become disappeared, because disappearance means we don't know what happened to them. Here we know because their bodies are here. The reason they do it is to instill fear and terror in the population, to forcefully silence them from speaking out for their rights, anything, pretty much keeping them under control. So it's not only to the family, the general population is being threatened. Distribution of bodies around Balochistan. Kill and dump operations. Then coming back to the family. In most of the countries, at least families will come and inform outside. Some places they even have a press conference with their pictures. My son, someone took, but it's military, but they are refusing. In this case, even though these individuals have been by clearly identified troops, the families are scared to death to even make things public. That makes us difficult to know how many people have disappeared so far. We know there are thousands, but we don't know the figures. We usually get a ballpark figure. There are reasons for why they don't. Number one, message has been given to them very clearly and strongly. If you ever make a message, if you make any complaint, if you make it public or contact international organizations, be killed, tortured. So any family, any mother, any wife, protect her loved one. So they will think, if I don't make noise, then at least my husband or my son, brother will not be tortured. Once they will disappear, they will come back. The fear which has happened is military will come and pick you up. They don't care hiding the identity anyway. They will come and pick you up, you become disappeared. So it's a much deeper reason. This sense, chill and terror. Balochistan, this particular practice of disappearance is happening, as I mentioned earlier. This group of people have been singled out for the ethnicity. Wrong. They didn't. Average people, like what happened in Second World War, Jews were singled out for the identity. Just simply you belong to this group, you are finished. That's what's happening here. No one have been arrested, despite the fact numerous human rights organizations have published reports, had conferences, campaigned strongly, media, international human rights, international organizations, UN, brought to justice. Government is directly complicit in killing instead of protecting their own citizens. And is part of Pakistan is a different story. At least they are under the control of Pakistan to protect them, which they are not. Instead, they are continuing this abuse. This did not happen. So this is about 10, 15 years ago. We have been documenting all these abuses, disappearances. The issue of weapons, especially US weapons, came up. The issue stands out in one example there. The killing of one of the respected leaders, Nawab Mufti. He was killed by US supplied weapons. Why he was targeted is very close to human rights organizations, including women's rights organizations. He was singled out because he stood up for women's rights. He stood up for women's rights not from his own ethnicity or tribe, or even from Balochistan. It is a doctor, medical doctor from Sindh province, another ethnic group. She was working in Balochistan in the military. She's a military doctor. She was raped by military officers. Jolly well knowing nothing will happen if she go and complain to the military officers, she went and complained to Mufti because he is the tribal ethnic leader there. He was a former governor, former chief minister, he's highly respected. He gave, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 days time to the military to identify and punish officer who committed this. They did not arrest. It appears that the senior officer who was involved. So Mufti started attacking the military. It's purely on the war escalated. A former military dictator was in power. So he gave orders to go all out. Killed. Mufti was killed in a cave. Has supplied bunker busting bombs and listening devices. These bunker busting bombs, high-tech listening devices were given to Pakistan with only for one reason. This is before bin Laden was killed. Is to track down bin Laden by listening device, using the listening devices, and to kill him if he's in a bunker. That's why it's called bunker busting. Instead of using that to the intended purposes, whether that purpose is correct or not is the issue that I'm here to discuss. Against their own people. You violated the trust which US have to be held accountable. And you went after a leader who raised voice for a rape that happened. When he was killed, we raised issue here with the State Department and others saying that, wait a minute, you gave the weapons. It was intended to target so-called terrorists and bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. But they are using it against their own people. Can you challenge? They didn't challenge. Because they need Pakistan to fight the so-called war on terror. That encourages Pakistan to use US weapons and other weapons. If you send the green light have been given, you can do whatever you want. He won't interfere. He won't raise voices. So the plight of Baloch people are extremely delicate. It's delicate. If there is war on terror now, but bin Laden is gone, so I don't know why US is still reluctant. War on terror is going, so the focus, they need help from Pakistan at the expense of Pakistan's abuses against own people, and in this case, Baloch population. So imagine you from the Baloch population's mindset. Anyone can be picked up. You could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could be a teacher. Even here are journalists here who have fled. There are people who fled because of that. And no one is going to come to rescue. Human rights organizations will make noise. Nothing is happening, including us. Baloch community like this is organizing events. Nothing is happening. That's what the sad reality, what we are seeing in Balochistan today. How to deal with this is something can turn overnight. I can tell you with my experience working on Afghanistan. In 1995-96, we had a campaign called World's Largest Forgotten Tragedy. No one cared about Afghanistan. Soviets left, US came, 500,000 children were killed at that time, internal fight. And overnight, 9/11 happened, and you know what happened. Everyone ran for Afghanistan. So until something happened, until we reached out the conscience of people around the world, two things have to happen. One is Baloch population should not stop shouting and crying. You have the moral authority. You are the immediate victims. You should speak out in whichever opportunities you get. I know among you have raised questions. People may look at you, who is he? He's getting trouble. Don't worry. You have a duty and responsibility for your people. You are the number one responsibility. Second is for us. You know, we deal with everything. So, but you have to keep on crying and shouting. And you never know. It will at least reduce the abuses. If you don't shout, they will try to do more and more. And we, human rights organizations, will keep on fighting and shouting. US, now Bin Laden is gone, should take a very strong view and give a strong message to Pakistan. Whatever weapons we give, or we gave, specialized weapons, not small weapons, don't use it against your own people. Now it's Baloch, tomorrow it could be Punjabis. The minute you allow the government to get away with abusing its own people, it could be anyone tomorrow. It could be for ethnic reasons today, tomorrow it could be for political reasons. And also there is Pakistanis who have the responsibility. If you want, or you have a deep responsibility next to Baloch people to cry for themselves, to stand up. It is such an ethnically divisive situation there. Been to Baloch conference, I was surprised how much divisiveness among Pakistanis. The same divisiveness, I'm sure it happened during Bengal was part of Pakistan, became Bangladesh. So the people of Pakistan also should rise up. Not everyone, at least someone should rise up. It's a bit amazing. We are not talking about the political issues. We are talking about abuses happening there. So the responsibility is on Pakistani journalists, politicians, but they are largely silent. That's a very bad sign. Not for Baloch, very bad sign for Pakistan. Because that's what happened in other countries. When you keep pushing a community, you never know how it's going to blow up. So in closing, thanks for organizing this. This event is a tribute to those who stand up outside and most importantly inside, the families who are crying in silence. The mother who didn't know what happened to their son and crying in silence. It is a tribute to them. Thank you very much.
Our next guest speaker is Ambassador Dr. Harswarup Singh. After a research assignment at Delhi School of Economics, Ambassador Singh obtained a PhD from MCSU. He spent 2 decades in the US as an international civil servant at UN and affiliated agencies, and he later returned to India as the president of Chaudhry Charan Singh Haryana Agriculture University, the governor of Pondicherry, and ambassador of India to Maldives. After his retirement, Ambassador Singh continued with consulting assignments in the US and around the world. Ambassador.
Friends, before I talk about Balochistan, I want to congratulate the organizers for arranging something that needs to be done on a wider basis, to which I will come later. The unjust treatment and persistent discrimination in Balochistan is a matter of deep concern. In the context of human rights and regional peace and security, the government of Pakistan has specialized in stepmotherly treatment of the people they don't like, especially Baloch. people. They have their way of dealing in a temporary fashion and large areas like Balochistan, I think it is around 45% in terms of area, probably not 60%. Has been ever since really the country was divided by the British before they left. Ever since that time, as you heard about Kalat and so on, Indian Balochis got special attention in terms of discrimination. My personal interest and personal contact with the proud and friendly people of Balochistan goes back to my childhood. My father was an army officer and he was posted for a while in Kuwait. And then my father was posted in Nowshera, in Northwest Frontier Province, and I was born there. So my childhood was spent in that area. I don't remember too much, I was young. But during that period, my father's immediate subordinate officer, he was called adjutant. And I asked my orderly, I said, who is that gentleman? He said, adjutant sir, because they pronounce him adjutant. With his son, he was my age, we went to the English medium Christian missionary run school, and he would tell me, I said, what is Baloch or Pathan? I don't believe the term Pashtun there at that time. And we played, we grew up together. And with his father, I would ask him some questions. Then my father retired and went to boarding schools, and then after a number of years as an international civil servant, I went back to India as Vice Chancellor. For some of you, Vice Chancellor is the President. When I was appointed Vice Chancellor, an American friend, he gave a party for me, said, we pray, we hope, Dr. Singh, you will be Chancellor soon, and then one day you will be President. And the British delegate who was sitting next to him was pulling it. He is already the President. When I went back to India, my third job was as High Commissioner Ambassador to Maldives. And again, I was fortunate to have a friend there. The first ambassador was Jam Sahab, the famous family of Singh. Jam Sahab was followed by Baloch. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name. You know, when you advance in years, three things happen. You become weak physically. Sometimes your income goes down. The third thing, I forgot. Third thing is you forget. But he was a very good friend. And this was an unusual phenomenon because for some reason, Pakistani diplomats do not like to mingle with Indian diplomats. I have seen other people, there is great animosity between two countries. but at a party or otherwise you meet, you talk. Riaz Khokar was a great friend in India. He was Pakistani ambassador to India. Then he was foreign secretary as well. No, many of you know.
Yeah.
When I came back from my India jobs, I tried to contact. He was ambassador here, and I thought it would be good to re-establish our friendship. I got a cold shoulder. Totally, I could not understand. And then I was told that now Indian diplomats have no such limitation. Nobody ever told me who would be my friend. And then later on, with this Baloch ambassador there, we had wonderful time. We were both patriots for our countries. I wouldn't give him classified information, neither would he. But we were good friends. And what happened was, with him, I discussed Baloch problems, I remember, I wrote about my childhood. And then there was SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. And there was a strong Pakistani delegation, in which, fortunately, was Baloch Gandhi, Samad Khan, and Faiz Ahmad Faiz, an Urdu poet, and I especially asked the chief of protocol to let me sit with them. I've been talking to them during cocktail hours, what I call mood adjustment hour. Serious business. They let me. And I did not sit with the diplomats. Trump and Faiz Ahmad Faiz. So I from then, it a sort of a special relationship developed between me and Balochistan. Then, going beyond my personal experience, after I retired, after I came back, I read, and the way Balochistan has been dealt is abominable, beyond abominable, criminal. And the problems are very complex. I met some of these friends, Krishna especially, Satish Gupta. I thought more and tried to study a little bit, and I found that it needs to be addressed more seriously. In Balochistan, careful analysis of the situation is needed. Causative factors, the current setting, and one key problem, besides what was said, are these tribal differences. Tribal and feudal structures take up in the way. You have one person, they think differently, the other individual thinks differently, and Pakistan has cleverly these differences to their advantage. So nothing can be done unless there is unity, and then, of course, the non-Baloch element whom Pakistan is trying to take advantage of. China is another meddler and is playing an important part in disrupting in the area. What if Pakistan, let us first assume that Pakistan as a Brooklyn wants to improve the situation. The first thing would be sincerity on their part. They have to really want this, not just things, temporary measures. They will have to really think honestly, sincerely, and then try to see to shift the personalized tribal political system that prevails to something more democratic. I think democratic ethos have to be cultivated, and without involving the people, they're not involved in the political processes. They should be made stakeholders. And Pakistan has made no effort to involve them, effort to keep them out of these important. The societal, socio-cultural fabric and impulses are totally against helping Balochistan. Their own internal problems, and then generosity in dealing with them, take out their mines, minerals, metals, gold, whatever, and then now giving these openly and surreptitiously to China. If they are serious about solving things, this can be done. These can be made palatable, we can make incremental progress and see if they are serious to improve the situation a bit in Balochistan as is. Of course, friends of Balochistan to feel that this is intractable and to different country, as indeed they are, and they were, as was pointed out. Now, there have been these attempts, but any serious attempt, with the result that there have been nearly 6 and 7 things, I have written half a dozen, 47. Activity has continued in the recent decade or so. Root causes were never, as I said before, addressed. And there is no seriousness at the moment. Satisfactory plan to ameliorate the situation in would need a number of things. For the time being, I'm assuming that Pakistan wants to do something. And then we will come to the independence issue. Pakistan government's resolve is basic understanding about what can be done. Good governance is the key. And good governance, of course, requires actionable administrative plans of a long-term nature rather than reactive measures that have so far been taken. That has been the norm. Control of corruption, good governance would imply incorporation of all ethnic groups. All these complications of religion now, all the people have to have a sense of belonging and a stake in improving the situation. Better coordination and cooperation would be needed, and state or provincial, whatever, change will be there. Policies and actions can be coordinated, which is not at the moment. Development around the state's long coastline, but what they are doing is not the solution. Very ably pointed out. Speaker to earlier. There are miscellaneous problems. The long-term relationship, central conflicts, the road, the trade, That could all follow if satisfactory economic and political solutions are found. Repatriation of Afghan refugees, over 20% of them are in Balochistan. And this is some drain, of course, on their resources. Also, refugee camps often act as breeding grounds for militants and terrorists, and in this case, they are openly held. It is not that Pakistan has not taken some limited, half-hearted measures and actions in Balochistan, but these have really not been very serious. Since there have been two parliamentary committees that were set up in 2004, which made some sensible suggestions. Provinces, which means Balochistan should have more rights, but they don't have much in terms of rights at the moment. And then interprovincial harmony, how the relationship between Punjab is really Pakistan. The army is from there. And it's concentrated. Ziaul Haq and Tarar and all these Jat military leaders, they control. I think Pakistan army, 48 or 49% are these Jats who have gone the wrong way. No meaningful actions followed. Similarly, two initiatives were taken. Aghaze Hakuk are rights, not of rights. Aghaze Hakuk, Pakistan, Balochistan, nothing happened. 18th Amendment, NFC award, some money was granted and so on, but it was vanished out and whatever is the same. It did not go far to address the relevant issues. While the developmental political policies stated by me are indicated for Balochistan, these would certainly help, they would significantly help benefit Pakistan as a whole because of the resulting national cohesion, stability, and ancillary economic advantages. But I don't think Pakistan is serious about that. If Pakistan is serious and expeditiously attends to problems as a national responsibility, since it situation can improve. In limited study of the subject shows that it's fine in the interim. Something ought to be done to improve of Baloch people. But in the long run, and it shouldn't be a very long run, independence, their separation, they are different people. What would finally be needed? These problems, people here, and this group particularly, are very much interested. I think we should express their concern of Balochistan, bring to the notice of, as is being done at the moment, say it more loudly. Political systems in this country are geared to taking up causes, congressmen, senators, others. So that step, it's being taken, but more should be done to awareness. More help should be sought from other sources. Within Pakistan, there are people others had Balochistan. Their help, we had a wonderful speaker, who is a Pathan and very much interested in helping this. But, sincerely think it's not enough just to sympathize, but to take some action to end the pain. We appeal to friends here to intensify our work, end the pain in Balochistan, which was the topic, the title of my talk. I appreciate it here.
Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Darius. Dr. Darius was born and raised in Balochistan, where his father was killed during the elections of 1951. At 17 years old, he immigrated to the United States, where he became a U.S. military civilian, working as a historian at the U.S. Army Material. He later became a professor at the U.S. Army War College and the University of Maryland. Articles and classified studies for the Army DC OPS. 2003 as an embedded command historian. The many religious rights group here in the U.S.
I have done a lot of work in the academic world, and this presentation is going to be biased. It's not thing that comes more from the heart. It's more like an advocacy issue. People of Balochistan. So if you take it in that context, I would appreciate it. My granddaughter, we went together to Thailand last year for a conference on Balochistan. The conference didn't take off. It was canceled due to the pressure. Pressure boom. But we assumed that it was Pakistan pressuring China to cancel the conference. Some excuses to get the Meng out of the country. Hotel waiting. So we adjourned and together in the hallways. Would not be Thai Secret Service. Sad situation. On status of the rich women is sort of a very degrading status. My granddaughter, Sylvia, very human rights and women's rights in the third world. Because of my ties to Balochistan, she was very much in. There have been many distinguished presentations made here. I have something written up. I don't know whether I should. I feel comfortable either way. I am a retired civilian of NAC, Department of the Army civilian. I spent 35 years working for the U.S. Army. I started my career as a professor at the Strategic Studies Institute, U.S. Army War College. There was a RIF, which stands for Action and Use. 1903. So the Army said, "Oh, where can we send you?" And they said, "Yes." Under the RIF, qualified for, we will send you. So it's desk ops of the Army in the Pentagon. And you don't have to go, you don't have to be interviewed. I said, in all honesty, I don't feel like I'd like to go in an environment not knowing what am I getting into. So I got an interview with the desk ops of the Army at the time. I interviewed with them, spent 45 minutes, he asked me all kinds of question. He said, "Move your stuff. This requires a DS clearance." Okay. It's interesting. So I was walking beside him. So I bid farewell as I was walking. "You see that guy sitting over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's his buddy. He was a colonel in Vietnam. And he's just sending him to North Africa to make him Middle East specialist." I said, "Good luck. Middle East specialist is one good. Serve the army as well." So I felt like cold water was poured on me. I'm proud of this army. I'm proud of the fact that DOD has a system placing departments. So I waited, finally got a job. Dark on, so you know, command, I spent 27. Was an embedded historian, I love to serve with the troops. Did the study of linguistics, lessons learned. Here for the weekend, I am. So, enough of that. I'm honored to be here. Arhan is an activist, president of Balochistan. Proud of what he's doing. She had a dozen funds. She had chapters there. Balochistan. In every state. Chapters. Yes. Got this spot. It was a great time to stay another year in Iran. I would have been carrying that spot. So I'm going to touch on a number of issues that the next presentation will see. This is really a learning experience for all of us. As a former high school teacher in West Virginia, professor at the University of Maryland, I found that I always learn more than I teach, because you have to know more than the students do to teach. Woodrow Wilson. How many of you have heard of Woodrow Wilson? Nobody. Everybody. One of our great presidents.
But the national
Self-determination. By the way, you're not very far from this. Oh, is that all right? Can you hear me? Okay. You're not very far from Stanton, Virginia. Woodrow Wilson. I recommend you sometime when you have a chance, take a drive. Drive from here, beautiful drive in the also Shenandoah Valley. Woodrow Wilson's vision of self-determination and clear, like a freedom bell around the world, from Scotland to Kurdistan to Balochistan and Sindh. The Pakistani army was 6 million of people. Can indeed kill all the Baloch, but it will not destroy the spirit of Balochistan. The spirit of Balochistan will be outside of Balochistan. And the Pak army, Punjabi army, they're going to go out and kill all the Baloch, the Gulf, in Iran, in Oman, Muscat, in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe. The Baloch need to do what the Kurds did. I had this flag made in Pennsylvania. I asked my friends in said it's illegal. Can't have it. Flag with me for that.
That's aside.
This flag, let me see if I can get this back up here. Well, I don't want to disrespect the flag. So what I will do is, give it to you, but thank you, you're the At any rate, enormous oppression exists in Balochistan and other ethnic millets. Awams is another word that we use. Balochistan and Iran, probably the same word is used. Eastern Balochistan. Where forces of nationalism, you have the notion that there is a state called Pakistan. I assume it stands for Pak, right? Pak means clean. Are these the clean people? And who are the
Pure,
unclean
pure.
people? You figure the rest of it.
Pakistan, Pak is pure.
Pak is pure. And anyhow, it's an artificial state. But there are a lot of Awams that make up Pakistan. The Baloch. The Sindh, they're brothers. They're each other. They both suffer. Punjabis run the country. Punjabis run the army, and the army runs the country. You figure that out. Now, what is happening historically is that the system where the Awams were left to live in peace with each other, and now you have the notion of nationalism. Pakistan as a nation oppress the others who do not hold the flag, who do not have Pakistani nation. Then that is one problem. Not only in Pakistan, but also in Iran, which is again an Awam country. So it's a clash of nationalism versus ethnicities and ethnics who have long been there for centuries. So, all right, so where's Balochistan? Somebody asked me in Pennsylvania, said, where are you from originally? I said, well, I'm an American. I have a passport. So I have an Iranian passport. I said, well, my father was a Baloch. So I claimed myself to be Baloch. My mother was a Parsi. Parsis are Shia. Baloch are Sunni. Perfectly well. He prayed, and his hands down. Everyone lived in peace. There was no problem. Afghanistan would come into our village and gifts like a horse for my father. My father was a Sardar. With us, for 2 days, put himself before that. Borders were open. It was sort of peaceful. Now, vision, separation, politics, religion, so when I tell them then, okay, well, where are you? Well, where's Balochistan? Kurdistan? Is it yes? They know about Kurdistan because they're Kurds in Europe. Kurds in other places, in India places. So that's all right. The Kurds are in Turkey, which calls them Kurds. Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Balochistan and Afghanistan. So there is sort of a bit of for Baluchi and Balochistan. And it's a word of Baluch people. Baluch people, well, depends on how you look at it. I come from the Nauri tribe. The Nauris came from Mesopotamia. Some people claim the word Nahra, Nauri comes from Nahrawan. Nahrawan means so in other words, they came from here. There are others that claim some of the Baluch came from Mesopotamia, from is now under ISIS. And anywhere, wherever they came from those areas, whether they were, whether something like the Naurus came from the Nauru Mountains. No, it's not. The mountains are near Nukundi and near the Iranian border.
Dalgrande.
My relatives who live so why am I interested in Balochistan? So like I mentioned that because of my family and my father was killed in Balochistan in Iran in elections. And he still, if you recall, was the 1953 was involved with Iran. Mossadegh came to power, and the Shah was going back to Iran. And the British, at any rate, that's Baluch people. Is there a nation state? What is a nation? Is what language of it all? Religion part of it? Christianity, clothing, history, a culture. Well, do the Baluch have these things? Anybody doubts that they have? There's something that's missing there. Or do they have a state? What is the state? The area with the border, right? This area is Balochistan. Well, for many centuries, area called Balochistan. If you look at your maps, you'll always see there's fighting during World War I, World War II. Oh, you can't hear. I'm sorry. Baluch, the Baluch were going with another Shah when he invaded India. And so the Baluch has always been in history. An Iranian mythological book called Balochistan, Rustam and Sohrab, as a distinct people. Sorry, I walked away, you probably couldn't hear me. When we have all type of the fact that there is there are Baluch people. Why do we close our eyes, our ears, and act like ostriches? That they don't exist. I thought we said never again. What happened to never? Committing and systematic killing just on. And why don't we say something about it? Loudly, clearly. Defense of a people with a culture, history, with a language of their own. What is the problem? It's sad. Last year, about 16 months ago, Mama Adir, a well-known Baluch activist, visited our little village in South Central Pennsylvania, where I live, with Miss Farzana Majid Baluch, another well-known Baluch activist. They were our guests, and we were delighted to have them there. Both have witnessed in their families judicial detentions whereby their immediate family members have been detained in unknown locations without any legal rights. Extrajudicial killings and detentions continue in Balochistan under the guise of national security, ISI, FC is Frontier Corps and their cohorts. Why do they call it Frontier Corps? What is the frontier? Is Balochistan a frontier for the Punjabis? Does that ring a colonial note in your head? You don't know. Divide and rule? Break the Baloch? Separate them, let them fight with each other. Solve their own problems. Call the Sardars a problem. After all, Sardars are pawns where the people root Balochistan. Why not deflect your problems and throw it to other people's ways? A dirty secret war of near genocide proportions is going on in Balochistan. Bodies of innocent Baloch are thrown out. Mass graves have been uncovered. The Baloch people wonder why there is such a silence in the West toward this. Do never again. Silence toward the West, I reiterate, would be our silent reading terrorism. Why? Because people think about them. If we don't give a damn about them, why should they give a damn about us? Problems of terrorism. We need to deal with some of these ethnic problems and stop supporting around the world. Where did most of the terrorists come from? 9/11. Think about it. It's not economic corridor, where that issue has been superbly treated here by our distinguished professor. The only note I have on that one is that it's a strategic long-term gain for China, benefits for the Punjabi, and no benefits for the poverty-stricken people. Increase its influence in South Asia and the Horn of Africa through a land link, port of water. How could this benefit the West? Why is the West silent to this development? Benefit indigenous Baloch people out of their larger water area. So much silence toward Islamabad and its actions toward Baloch people. Indigenous people have any rights in their own land. Powerful that the world remains silent. Is this part of the rivalry between India and China? Is the Indian Ocean India's maritime backyard? Qatar and other ports, would they become indicative of PLA's interest in the Indian Ocean and its resources to include Russian oil? Chabahar and China in the water. Economic and naval rivalry between China and India, watched carefully by Japan. Larger context, Balochistan becomes a pawn, a potential area for rivalry between India and China. And you've heard that old African proverb. But I add to that the grass, elephants would go their own way. Balochistan. Thank you.
The next speaker, Krishna Kudupati, works as a mobile security consultant for the U.S. federal government and a volunteer with many Hindu and interfaith cultural organizations in the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. Americans, Krishna first found out about Balochistan after India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave a historic speech in August of 2016, helping the American Friends of Balochistan and Baloch people raise awareness about Balochistan within American Hindu communities.
Mata, I'll keep it short. I would like the Hindu Americans and Hindus all over the world to support this. There's a lot of Hindu heritage sites in Balochistan, and especially like in the Mehergarh area. Hindu heritage sites go back more than 4,000 years. Is being done as we now as we speak, and the most powerful Shakti Peeth, it's called a Shakti Peeth, is one of the 54 brilliant Shakti sites, like energetic sites, called Hinglaj in the Hingola Park, which is right now outside India and in Balochistan, controlled by Pakistan. One of the big concerns for me is that the Islamic State coming eastward now after being driven away and taking over the Pakistan areas. And if this happens, along with the way the Hindus have been decreasing since partition from almost 15% to almost 2%, and even going down, not only the Hindu people are going away, but also the Hindu heritage sites could be destroyed. We've already seen how the sites of Palmar and all have been destroyed in the TVs and all. So I don't want this to happen, and that's why I'm supporting Ahmad and this cause. Thank you very much.
So now that all of our speakers are done, some people have written down their questions on note cards. And we ask some speakers. I guess this question goes out to anyone who can answer. A seat in the UN Security Council in spite of occupying Tibet.
Kashmir and Balochistan.
Okay. Anybody answer that?
It's not a relevant question. I mean, Russia is basically snatched Crimea because the UN Security Council is not going to do this, right? This is from the possession of nuclear weapons and they're from the nuclear weapons.
Okay, next one is, could the Baluchi Sahib or his Barmi friend please share their knowledge on Indian involvement in the Baluchi nationalist movement? The question was, for his Barmi friend, please share their knowledge on Indian involvement in the Baluchi nationalist movement.
Who's the question for?
When we have a situation of genocide, when we have a situation being disappeared in the thousands, a situation where you have mass graves, each and every human duty is to get involved. Not Brahmins, Hindus. They are our most respected brothers. They have been in Balochistan. They have been in Balochistan for thousands of years. The Mehergarh archaeological site is testimony to what I am saying. The most sacred Hinglaj, thousands of years old, is testimony to what I'm saying. You see, in Sanskrit, there's so many common words. We are distant from India. They are brothers. Why not? But the jihadi can come, push, and dump their bodies, and a Brahmin cannot speak out against it.
Next question is no doubt Pakistan is a state sponsor of terror. Why is the world, United States, or European Union not taking action against it? And why are there not as heavy sanctions against Pakistan?
Yeah, so basically, I share the exasperation, which is obviously motivating this question. And unfortunately, Pakistan gets away with this because of nuclear coercion, right? So if Pakistan didn't have nuclear weapons, India would have sorted Pakistan out some time ago. The only enemy the Pakistan army has defeated is actually democracy. So nuclear weapons, in a number of ways, it protects them from a military response from India. It also draws the U.S. into a conflict to basically put pressure on the Indians to not respond. These nuclear weapons intimidate any policymaker from simply withdrawing. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people on the Hill and other parts of the U.S. government that if the Americans weren't there exerting some kind of influence and gathering intelligence, that things would actually be worse. Now, I don't happen to share their view. Obviously, I've written this at length, but most policymakers tend to be risk averse through their term without everything going FUBAR. Point of view, Pakistan is like a broken parking meter. For those of you who remember parking meters, when we actually put coins in. I put a quarter in, and I was expecting 15 minutes, and maybe I got 5 instead. You beat on it, kick on it all you want, you still get 5 minutes. So there is some predictability that I put a quarter in, I get 5 minutes. Policymakers who tend to be very risk averse fear policy towards Pakistan, they might put a quarter in and get minus 15 minutes, right? And so I think policymakers are very comfortable knowing that Pakistan is a marginal satisfier, concerned and afraid of taking on a whole new policy, imagines the kind of relationship where we can say very forthrightly, as I believe we should, that Pakistan is an enemy, not a friend. We should actually be treating it as such. I mean, I would like to see people discussing sanctioning Pakistan, Taliban and Lashkar-e-Taiba and other groups in the same way that we are sanctioning the Russians for supporting militants in militants in Syria. So that's not going to happen. And it's also the case that the Pakistanis are very good at lobbying. They've cultivated think tanks around town. I'm going to say it publicly, and I don't care if it offends Moeed Yusuf. Job on someone else's dime, right? Moeed sits over there writing articles in the New York Times, advocating that we should be placating Pakistan, even though they take our money and our kill our troops. And Moeed is doing this on our dime. Do it at Brookings. Why are you doing it there? Is that the Pakistanis are very good lobbyists. They're very good at taking Congress on congressional delegations, both Senate and the House. Yeah, they're dramas. I mean, they're absolute preposterous. I've done these things myself, but you have to look at the degrees of experience of some of the people that go on these congressional delegations. Are very easily fooled. And you'll even have people who should not be so easily fooled, but he has a brain tumor, so maybe that's why. Payne, who goes on these congressional delegations, they took him on one of the dog and pony shows to North Waziristan, and he came back also saying that Pakistan is so awesome. So it's a very, there's actually been about this, and for those of you that want to understand how it is that Pakistan continues to screw us, paying, remember Osama bin Laden, right? Nothing happened after Osama bin Laden. The checks kept coming. Schaefer and Howard Schaefer wrote this very brief book called Riding the Roller Coaster. It's also ironically published by USIP. Have a little bit more patience and you want to read more than 100 pages. And Ambassador Hussein Haqqani's magnificent delusions about how Pakistan has really taken this country for a ride. So I support the question, but unfortunately, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see a different policy. By the way, they're already trying to lobby the Trump administration's process. They're very, very good at this. And it's very rare that you'll find a scholar like me saying Pakistan so clearly. And the reason is they won't give me a visa, right? Being PNG is like being pregnant. Once you're pregnant, you have all the unprotected sex you want. Other people like Michael Kugelman and other folks still like the red carpet treatment, Peter Bergen, even some of my colleagues that I have a lot of admiration for. They won't speak out this clearly and this publicly because they still want their visas. And that's another really important thing for you to understand. This is how they extract compliance from people who actually know better.
Next question is for anyone who wants to answer. Could anyone briefly comment on the controversy surrounding events of the American Friends of Balochistan?
What is the question?
Could you briefly comment on the controversy surrounding?
So I understand what we are doing is controversial.
Why?
I don't know how come it is controversial. We are in the capital, a democracy on earth. And as some of the speakers said, my most honorable said, some of the arms that are used in Balochistan. As I speak, Pakistan was using mortars in the Irabuki area. Can you imagine an 18-year-old kidnapped in the evening from Twitter on 25? And on August 1, 25 miles away in Mastoon, what is found are only bones. The bones is his identity card. And that is how we came to know that the 18-year-old was picked up by the Pakistan soldiers. I would please ask the person who asked this question, look back at what they did in Dhaka, in Bangladesh. They said we are going to correct the genes of the Bengalis because the Bengalis are short and the Hindi guys in Pakistan really and in Balochistan. So they went to do correction of the genes of Bengalis and they killed 3 million Bengalis. They raped more than 200,000 Bengali women, many of them Muslim, 30,000 babies of war. There they are coming into our homes, father's garden, and then they are asking us bring our basic right. We are not demanding anything extra. We are only asking basic human right. First of all, the right to life and the pursuit of happiness. My people deserve that. We are in America. America has got lots of people who believe in freedom and justice for all. That gives us strength. There is no controversy around what we are doing.
Next question is, for Robert Darius. Do you think that the Guadalajara port is actually a military base of China to dominate the Indian Ocean, to tackle US and allies in the event of
Our distinguished professor needs to answer that much better than I can. I'll give you my 2 cents worth. It's hard to happen in 2020 or 2025. At the rate that China is growing its economic might and also seems to be increasing its military might, we should be far more concerned about what China and the world. And China is not a democracy. It is the most populous democracy in the world. India is our friend. If we want to increase forces of moderation and democracy, then we should align ourselves much more closely with India, with people who aspire freedom. And kowtowing to China's people. China, us, dealing with China is a major global problem. In the 21st century. China does. It's going to be crucial in life.
All right, that's the end of it. We have a movie that we'd like to show.
Excuse me, I have some. I didn't put it. It's for Christine.
We're running out of time now. I had to vacate the room.
That's a move.
It's the same question that you asked about the permanent member of the UN Security Council. I'm sorry, we already answered that.
It is unbecoming of a permanent member to behave in such a fashion.
I'm sorry, that's not how it works, whether you like it or not. That's not how the UN Security Council works. His behavior, I'm not going to defend his behavior, but he behaves terribly, Russia behaves terribly. And quite frankly, there are a lot of bad actors.
Unfortunately, they don't have, these are bad names.
Yeah, anyways, this is just not a question that's germane to this.
That's one quick question.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry, we're running out of time,
I have
so,
just a question from everyone sitting here, actually.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We
We
have
are
5 minutes, and we have to be on. If you have any
That's
questions,
convenient.
I mean, I have a specific question for Mr. Kumar, I guess, I believe.
The only question from a lady.
Yeah, from Mr. Kumar, yeah. Okay. He mentioned Mr. Bhatti as a respected leader and someone who stood up as for women's rights, and I as a woman take offense in that. Because he himself mentions in his book that how he killed his uncle. He takes pride in that, and he has been accused of a lot of as well. I mean, keeping aside all the political issues and everything else, you cannot call him a humanitarian. Do you have I mean, are you an expert on that person? Are you sure that this is what exactly what you would like to, humanitarian or someone who stood up for women's rights? I think
Yeah.
one of the 2 women in this room, and I
Okay.
totally for women.
The reason why you mentioned Mukti's stand on a rape that happened in Balochistan to a not Baloch woman against the gruesome abuse from the women's point of view, women's rights point of view. There is no other word I can't. He stood up for the women's rights.
So I want to support her position. I mean, I didn't say this, but I have said this in congressional hearings. This is what, I was very hesitant to participate in this, because I do not like one-sided discussions. And I do insurgency, that's what I study, that's what I teach. And there is a whole other side of this, and that is, Punjabi female teachers go to Balochistan to teach. If those Punjabi women were not going to Balochistan to teach, there would be no teachers in Balochistan. So it is not just the case that violence is only being done against Baloch. It is also the case that Baloch engage in violence.
Exactly.
And this is, whether you like it or not, it must be said, when you have violence being perpetrated against civilians, your cause is diminished. I support a free and independent Palestinian state. But I will also say that Hamas and Hezbollah degrade the very things that they claim to stand for because they kill innocent people. Same thing is true in Kashmir. Say that you respect the rights of Kashmiris to not undergo atrocities when in fact the very same people here are engaging in atrocities. So this is one of the reasons why I was very hesitant to come to this panel, because I view this as a conflict. And as conflicts are of this enduring nature, there are very rarely no side that has. And I think the so-called killing of the colonizers, which is how it's often described to kill Punjabis, is absolutely appalling. And many of those Punjabis that have been killed have been women. So I very much applaud your question. Anyway, about Afghanistan, for example, I don't think, for example, Massoud is a war hero. He's a war criminal. Be very careful in how we talk about these heroes, because they might be the hero to person X, but they've actually been the progenitor of violence to person Z.
Exactly. And if someone has been killed,
Yeah, well, this is where the controversy starts, but I applaud you for asking that.
thank you.
We appreciate the different points of view, running out of time, and we respect the different point of views. Surprised to see about sending people to talk about our martyrs and to try to denigrate our martyrs. Stood up for the rights of the Baloch people. He was our hero, national martyr. He was the father of the Baloch nation. Pardon me, even in America, fathers of the nation
Who
were
were
not
rapists,
too very clear.
who kept slaves, and
So
we should not
we should
excuse them of their sins.
we should give credit to a martyr. Please don't. I don't give Rawalpindi to disrespect our martyrs.
Doing. That's not what she's doing.
We are over, Professor.
Just I want to add one more point. Basically, Bukti has been always, Pakistan
This is a forum
guy.
for
He's
speaking
been always
respectfully
with
with freedom
federal
of
government.
speech.
He was not killed for what he had been doing. He was being killed because once he stood for the Baloch cause. So he was always Pakistan favorite guy. He's been like appointed as a governor
That is why
for
I
the province.
specified.
But he was killed once he stood for the Baloch tribe. He was always favorite guy, what he had been doing. But once he changed to the cause, and then he was wiped out. There's a quite difference between his previous life and what he did in his last life.
We had a
So
question.
that's totally
Our friend here.
irrelevant. Thank
Can
you
I
so much.
have 30 seconds, please?
So we have to close
This is against freedom of speech and this is harassment that
We can
making
ask,
someone
if you have any
point
individual
fingers at
questions, please ask the speakers directly. You have more opportunity to speak. This is not the end of the day. American Friends of Balochistan will be there. More, you can come and speak more. The website is there. We'll engage more. And we ran out of samosas too. We'll be, next time we'll fill more samosas and make it a bigger event. Appreciate everyone's feedback and your and the visit.
Thanks for coming in.
Watching
I'm a student. And I talked as a woman. I made it very clear that I'm talking about a specific issue. I talked about specific issue. And do not call a person who is not respectful to women. I do not respect Zardari for that. I do not respect Pakistanis for that. I do not respect Trump for that, calling them cabbages by the pussies. I would say that as a woman. I would say that to anyone. Even if he's a Pakistani, he's an Indian, he's American, he's from any nationality. This person, he's an intellectual. He's speaking here. He's not supposed to shut someone down. I'm just saying something.
I just want to explain this. Like, the university wants us out by 6. That's why we had any questions.
This university, the universities are supposed to encourage freedom of speech. I said I spoke as a woman. He pointed out stuff.
Like I said, we have to wrap up. And if some of us have so long, we actually wanted this. We wanted opposing viewpoints and we wanted this passionate so we had to wrap it up.
I never said anything about Pakistan. I never said anything about I didn't say anything. I just said something about this. I would say this. I would say this. Yes. I'm only
But who is hot?
I studied biochemistry.
Oh, so he was
I like
We had the guys in the war college talk about this reference to our there was nothing substantive for we were I was but yeah, people wrote this down and they not well for living what they wanted to write. And they were like, oh, this Northern Virginia. Before I go back to Pennsylvania, my non. She was asking what we need to get together. Sure, yeah. He allows everyone to my mom is from Balochistan. Yes. And I can't say my dad is from Pakistan. Both his parents were born in Sarawak. Our family comes from Sarawak. Connections. Big time. Big time. Have you been to Sarawak? This one's pretty across the border. I'm political. I got rid of the 7 years.
She's saying that I'm ISA. I'm a local student. I would complain to university officials that you are putting such figures here who expect that the students are I don't know why they don't want to walk this stuff. It's a all the that you are
It's not a natural state. No one says it's a natural state. It's a state from South Asia. And Afghanistan, there's no active electorate. It's all communist majority. Where's the development of Pakistan? Hey, you know what the problem is because when we talk about so you're gonna say I'm not a brother now? That's what okay. All right. You have experience. I'm actually a pedagogue.
and now he's about the system. Like he said, then it says
They're just like a small one. Yeah, I just connected me to Abdullah said that they were really small Baloch community here in DC. Most of them are from Syria. We should get together maybe. You give me a call, right? So I give
तो कोई यार पांच जवान यार तो ब्याह कैसा
I spend more days than you do. You don't know my background. You don't know. I know. I just said, have you spent one day? You're trying to have to do this. You didn't spend one day.
I'm not saying to me, but yes.
You were the university? Okay. You just said we don't trying to clarify.
No, I'm not.
So, okay. You're denying that the So how do you feel like you feel with this part of the outside, part of the
I'm not sure proud of this. I'm proud of my yeah, we have our those videos found out, and we have more many housing, and you will see we have British colonizers, we got rid of them. Russians were advanced, we got rid of them. If children come here, we got rid of them. Yeah, he's point where it was corrected. No, I'm fine. See, this is the irony. Like, these people are born in Pakistan. We supported 3 million refugees. They are born in Pakistan and they are against.
Because of the war which Pakistan imposed on Pakistan way before Suez intervention. If you watch
Okay, Afghanistan invaded Pakistan. Our agency was invaded by
No. If you go,
don't talk about Pakistan. No, I'm not. Does that? What does that mean? What does that have? What does that have to do with it? You were there in the 60s. You were in the 60s. You're 50 years old. You're 60 years old. You're 60 years old. You were there in Bajor in 1960. You were in Bajor in 1960 when Nels Khan invaded Bajor in 1960. You were there. You were there. That's not, I wasn't taught anything. This is a fact. This is a fact. It's internationally noted fact. Afghanistan, Dawood Khan invaded Bajor in 1960.
wait, you can ask any guy in ISI.
No, I know.
You can ask any guy in ISI. They don't worry about it.
You can't call everything jihad. Where's jihad? Where are we doing
Jihad. No, sir. It's
Afghanistan does not recognize the sovereignty of Pakistan.
What is your problem, brother? Why can't you
So-
live your territory?
We do. Our territories at
You are claiming my territory.
okay, but our territory is questioned day and night.
That is definitely.
India does not recognize our territory. Afghanistan does not recognize our territory.
We do. We do.
Afghanistan?
I'm not saying about
You're
Afghanistan.
I'm just saying. No, I don't. Because I know for sure. No, I didn't put you. I put you.
I didn't speak a single word.
I didn't live in America. I don't speak America.
No, but yeah, Pashtun never, forget their language. She's been living in it. She's been living. My kids think.
So if it's Irish lives in America, they're not Irish?
No, we're not talking, but they're different people that.
Language, buddy. Stop. The Irish, these two examples are on point. They're not history.
What if I had an example? You don't.
We will talk sometime.
Appreciate the opportunity to be Christian. You don't have to go support.
Well, we talk, I got some quick ideas. I mean, I like that she teaches me a lot. I know you probably don't like it because you have to I learn a lot. I like to meet with her. If I work with you guys, I like to meet with her. Just one on stuff. Ask me questions. I like to know. But I don't understand really. Lots of. Oh, by the way, you write very well. Your speech is very nice. Oh yeah, love the time of Colera.
They're part of the military.
And other people are sort of criticizing Trump a lot. I also criticize Republicans. But as far as I can tell, Republicans really people who support Balochistan. I was supposed to wear this badge.
We are from Balochistan. I am just.
She's in a meeting. She's saying, oh, I think Trump Russians are rapists or something. And so I'm like, what if you had to leak over it here?
I just couldn't stand it.
Anyway, we have to talk about, we have to, so, look, I
That's okay. So if you have,
come up with a strategy.
everybody has their own interest. We don't deny that. That's your problem.
You should focus on the human rights violation, particularly documents
evidence
He has
or
held that he has
testimony
he
that the US
has
will
I mean,
it's very powerful.
he
Are you
said
aware of
he
this
did that
group from
he killed
Iranian? They're actually designated terrorists in America. MKP, Mujahideen. Does that ring a bell to you? Let me look up their names. Okay, these are some effective Iranian in America, Iranian advocacy group in Congress. But they represent these crazy people in Iran, this crazy group.
they don't allow
Anyway, so there is this group. I think their nickname is Mujahideen in Iran. They were part of the revolution. They became violently against the Iranian government. They actually fight with Saddam Hussein's side in the Iranian war. They come to the U.S. to declare them to be a terrorist organization. But they are such effective lobbying in the United States that they have all this support within Congress because they hate they hate the Iranian government. Yeah, they hate the Iranian government. So they get all the support within Congress. They're very effective lobbying, and they get